We begin with the collapsed German government. German opposition parties are calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in parliament following this week's collapse of the three-party governing coalition. A no confidence vote would trigger snap elections. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz of the Social Democrats has so far resisted any pressure. He's seeking to cling on to a minority government until a vote can come in mid-January. But Germany's opposition parties say that's not soon enough.
The head of Germany's main opposition party, Friedrich Merz, on his way to meet with Chancellor Olaf Scholz, following the dramatic collapse of Scholz's coalition government. Merz insists Germany cannot wait long before holding snap elections. Merz's party, the center-right Christian Democrats, are currently the most popular political party in Germany. But his meeting at the Chancellery ended after less than half an hour, without any results. The opposition leader then went to meet with Germany's president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, behind closed doors. Also on Thursday, Steinmeier officially handed Finance Minister Christian Lindner his certificate of dismissal. He was fired by Scholz the day before. Two other ministers from Lindner's party, who resigned, also received their papers.
It will not be easy for any of them to have to abandon unfinished projects and end their work. And yet, circumstances can arise that lead to the premature end of a governing coalition. This is when differences of opinion between the partners become major differences, so major that they can no longer be overcome. You obviously reached this decisive point yesterday.
A major disagreement that brought Germany's first ever three-party coalition to collapse was over the 2025 budget. Reportedly, Lindner's opposition to Scholz's plan to ease the limits on debt in order to boost support to Ukraine by an additional €3 billion.
Finance Minister Lindner blocked legislation for irrelevant reasons too many times. He acted to serve his clientele and party too many times. He broke my trust too many times.
Scholz's economic advisor, Jörg Kukies, is replacing Lindner as the new finance minister. Scholz plans to proceed as a minority government with the Greens until mid-January. But passing legislation will require cooperation from opposition parties, including the Christian Democrats, who have only offered conditional cooperation if the Chancellor agrees to an earlier vote of confidence. Their deadline within less than a week.
We heard from the German Chancellor in that report, Olaf Scholz, also saying that he regrets that the coalition came to an end in a time in what he says has great uncertainty in the world. Now, he's referring, of course, to Germany's ties to the U.S. and how important they are with Donald Trump about to become president again. And he said that it's essential that the German government live up to its responsibilities in Ukraine and in the Middle East.
At the moment, in uncertain times, we depend on our close transatlantic relationship. It's clear that Germany will have to fulfill its responsibilities. And in Europe, we will have to band together more than ever and continue to invest in our own security. Because the situation is serious. There is war in Europe, and in the Middle East, tensions are on the rise.
Well, I'm joined now by Julian Müller-Kahler from the German Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. Julian, it's good to see you again. There's a lot to talk about. A lot's happened since we last spoke. Let me ask you about the timing of all of this. Should the German government attempt to limp along, be crippled, another 4 months? Do you think it can even do that?
Oh, as you noted, I'm based in Washington, D.C., so I have much insight onto the political scene in Berlin anymore.
Well, how does it look, though, from where you're sitting? From where you're sitting, I mean, does it look like the German government can survive another 4 months?
I mean, I think a lot of the political tension here is currently based or focused on the consequences of the Trump election that happened on Tuesday. And so the news broke in sort of kind of the shadow of the US presidential election. I mean, I think the uncertainty comment that Scholz made is absolutely on point. We live in a world where there are multiple wars, where, there's decoupling and deglobalization. And you see governments scrambling and struggling left and right. So the fact that US is getting a new president in January, and that Germany doesn't necessarily have a functioning government, then should seriously be a concern for European decision makers, no question.
Yeah, we noticed that the Chancellor also name-checked Donald Trump without directly saying that Trump was a source of uncertainty for Germany. I mean, what do you think the incoming Trump administration will mean for Germany and for wider transatlantic relations?
I think there is this feeling or dichotomic feeling in Germany that, Trump is bad and Harris would have been good. I don't necessarily share that view to the extent that it is reported on in Germany, because I think that Trump much more is a symptom than he is a cause. There are seismic shifts among the American electorate for a more isolationist US foreign policy, for a more nationalistic trade policy. And those larger trends should be concerning for Europe and Germany in particular. For the longest time, the German economy has benefited immensely from open borders and increasing trade patterns, global trade patterns. And that time most likely is coming to an end, particularly the decoupling efforts from China. And that is the threat to Germany and its business model, much more so than a Trump presidency.
Let me ask you, too, about the notion of Germany and the United States still knowing each other, being familiar with each other. The media here in Germany, they were, I think it's fair to say, shocked that Harris did not win. And even if you look at the covers of newspapers, Die Zeit had an article about Harris losing and used an expletive that starts, a four-letter word that starts with F. I mean, to show that they were shocked by what had happened and is about to happen. Do you think, and the reason I point this out is, do you think that Germans are being presented an accurate picture of what Americans are considering when they go to the ballot box?
Well, it's the $1 million question, right? A lot of the journalists are often based in big cities. They're based in New York and in Washington, D.C. Many of them are here in the city where the White House is.
That's
and,
right.
The American president gets elected by all Americans and not just those that live in cities. And I think, yes, absolutely. Pollsters, commentators, analysts, there should be a big reckoning in the sense of whether they get the trends right. I mean, this wasn't just a loss for Harris. This was a victory for Donald Trump, much more to the extent so that he, almost got New York, almost got Virginia. So there are larger trends at work, that there is a deep dissatisfaction among the American voter and electorate of where the country is headed. I think a lot of people make their decision based on domestic issues, economic issues, and less so on foreign policy. But as I said again, both with regards to foreign policy as well as regards to domestic policy, Trump is a symptom of larger trends than he is a cause of them. And I think the left and the Democrats ought to be, waking up to that fact.
Do you think they are waking up to that fact?
Well, I think it's a bit too early to tell. I think that, you see Bernie Sanders issued an interesting statement. You see others in the Washington Post or other medias, arguing for continued resistance. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But, we have to recognize that basically the Republican Party has become the working class party. No, Trump didn't just win Arizona or Georgia or North Carolina. No, he won all of the three Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania with, close to 150,000 vote difference. This is core, or used to be core Democratic constituencies. And I think it points to a larger trend that we see around the Western world, that there is an increasing dissatisfaction, a lack of trust in government institutions, in democratic institutions, and the system that they represent. And so populist forces, whether it is the AfD in Germany, whether it is Donald Trump in the United States, ride that wave of distrust. And it is going to be the task and probably the endeavor of the next generations of politicians to regain that trust in institutions, because the US election made one thing very clear: you can't defend democracy against your own people.
Well, I wonder, too, with Trump's victory now, I mean, Trump represents a kind of right-wing populism that you could, in some ways, compare to what we've seen here in Germany with the rise of the AfD party. You also have the rise of the Sarah Wagenknecht party. Do you think, considering we've got possibly early elections coming early next year, does Donald Trump automatically, with his win, have some leverage over the political infrastructure of Germany, if you will, knowing that his victory could give victory to the AfD, for example, in the next election? I mean, that's a lot of power.
No, certainly. I think that his presidency and his re-election will have consequences also for the German Bundestag election. You know, it's interesting. I think the characterization of the past of between left and right no longer holds an accurate description, I would argue. I mean, some of Trump's policies, particularly on trade, are incredibly left-leaning, and then a lot of his stuff on immigration is very right-leaning. The same can be said about Sarah Wagenknecht's party or the AfD. A lot of their issues are approaching core left-leaning, constituencies. So the dichotomy between left and right, I think, is no longer an accurate description. The Economist has been pushing this idea of drawbridge up, drawbridge down, so people supporting globalization the way that it was organized or opposing it. Yeah. And I think those are the default lines of the new political debate that we see happening across Western democracies. Yeah.
We're hearing the word political realignment a lot this week as well, but we'll save that for another time to discuss. Julian Müller-Kahler joining us from Washington. Julian, as always, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has held a closed-door meeting with opposition leader Friedrich Merz. The two politicians disagree about the timing of likely snap elections. Merz is the leader of Germany's centre-right Christian Democrats, and he has rejected Scholz's plan and has called for an immediate no-confidence vote in Parliament and new elections. Scholz stressed again on Thursday that he does not want to call for a vote of confidence before mid-January next year. And earlier, DW's head of news, Max Hoffmann, told me more about the meeting and how it went.
Well, we know that it was short, 25 minutes, so that gives you usually two possibilities. Either they were on the same page right away, not much to discuss, or they couldn't find a path forward, and it seems it was the latter. No path forward, just because of the reasons that you just mentioned in that report, because of the date of the vote of confidence. Very important to the opposition leader here to have it as soon as possible. He said next week, hold it next week, or maybe even earlier, as you said earlier, Gerhard there, but it seems very important to Olaf Scholz to not have it earlier, but to maintain the date he mentioned yesterday, and that is the 15th of January. So in a nutshell, no result from that meeting.
As you said, Scholz is adamant that he wants to wait. Why does he want to wait?
There are a couple of possibilities. First of all, it's not looking good for his party, the SPD, the Social Democrats. In the polls, they're hovering around 15-16%. That's not good. And in order to turn that around, if the possibility exists, he would need some time. And that's maybe what he's trying to buy. And the second possibility is there's a number of laws that they still want to pass, what's left of this coalition, important to them. For example, a reform of the pension system or a the asylum system in Germany, to name just two of those. Of course, they would need the Christian Democrats to do that, so there is something to negotiate there. Maybe some kind of solution saying, okay, we'll have a vote of confidence earlier if you help us pass those laws. And Friedrich Merz, the opposition leader, has said he was willing to talk about that, but only if Olaf Scholz would concede to have that vote of confidence earlier.
Now, this is a pretty serious political crisis in Germany, and it also comes at a very difficult and tense time. Politically, Trump is being re-elected in the USA, some readjustment needed there. The war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, to just name a few. Is the German government right now fit for purpose?
What remains of the coalition is certainly trying to give that impression that they are fit for purpose, fit for duty. Robert Habeck, the Vice Chancellor from the Greens, said so today in a press conference, when it comes to international business, they were going to continue to do their job. But you know how it is. You know, every leader who's in this last phase is a lame duck to a certain extent. Nobody knows that better than other leaders. So the people that Olaf Scholz has to deal with when he goes abroad in the EU, for example, or also at the climate conference in Baku. And you know what? He just canceled his flight there, so that gives you an impression. Yes, they can handle certain things, but as soon as money is involved or the approval of Parliament, that's the limit.
Now, what's your take here? Can a snap election, whether it's happening in December or later in the next year, restore political stability if we're looking at the polls right now?
Just to go very basic here, in Germany, it's about coalitions. That's how this works. That's how you get a majority in the Bundestag, so in the German parliament. And the fewer partners you have, normally, the more stable a government is, because you don't have to try to get all kinds of different sides of the political spectrum under one umbrella. What just happened here, because the current coalition, or the coalition until yesterday at least, had 3 parties. So would it be possible to again have sort of the classic coalition of 2 parties? If you look at the polls right now, it seems possible, because the Christian Democrats are very strong in the polls, 33%, and also the SPD. So the party that has the current Chancellor Scholz would probably have enough votes to make up and have sort of what we used to call a grand coalition, which is not necessarily a grand coalition anymore because the SPD lost so much. But this seems a possibility, and this has been a pretty stable government in the past. But it's getting harder because, as you said, you have more parties that are deemed undemocratic by other parties, for example, the far-right AfD, and they're gaining ground. Altogether, they may make up a quarter of the vote. So that complicates things.
Max Hoffmann there, DW's head of news reporting. Thank you, Max. The German government crisis is also a talking point in Budapest, where leaders of the European political community are meeting. That group also includes non-EU states such as Britain and Ukraine, as well as NATO. How did European leaders there react to the collapse of Germany's ruling coalition? DW's Brussels bureau chief Alexander von Namen gave us the latest from that summit.
Well, European leaders that have come together here at the Puskás Stadium in Budapest, they showed little concern about the situation in Germany, stressing that it's a democratic process and that they have trust in the institutions in Germany, with some officials even saying off the record that they think it may be not such a bad idea for Germany to hold elections sooner than anticipated, after months of bickering among the coalition partners in Germany, with them being sometimes not able to find a common position on important European topics. But let's have a listen to what the leaders had to say in front of our camera.
Olaf Scholz is a strong leader. I know him very well, so I think he will navigate during the coming months, making sure that Germany plays its role at the world stage.
One thing's for sure, Europe is not strong without a strong Germany, and that is one thing that we will look forward to continuing to see in the next few months. It is very important for us.
For the European Union, it is important to stay the course that we've engaged on since many years now, and it's a successful course, standing together, overcoming the challenges, and most importantly, taking our responsibility in our own hands.
Germany, of course, is the economic engine of the European club, but I would not dramatize it. This is part of democracy. In democracy, you have government and you have elections and you have new governments. That does not mean that it stops the European economy or that it stops the influence that Germany has.
Alexandra, this crisis came on the same day that Donald Trump won the US presidential elections. How has that news landed among European leaders?
Well, I have to say, Gerhard, that I was struck by the fact that many leaders, most leaders, I would have to say, are focusing here on a positive message, a positive signal they apparently want to send to Washington. They stressed their joint interest with the US, emphasizing that it's good for both the EU and the US to work together, and also saying that in the past they were able to cooperate with Donald Trump during his term in office. And this is quite striking because, of course, everyone here understands that Europe may be facing a potential trade war and a weakening of the NATO alliance, both of which Donald Trump has threatened. So there are big challenges ahead. And, of course, everyone here also understands that Europe will need to do more for its defense, with the French President Emmanuel Macron calling on the Europeans and European leaders not to outsource Europe's security any longer to America. However, we also have to say that's something that they have been discussing for many years, and it doesn't seem that Europe has been able to make a lot of progress on that.
Now, Ukraine's President Zelensky is also there in Budapest. Trump has threatened to cut off support or reduce support for Ukraine. Do the Europeans have a plan if that happens?
Well, I would say that at the moment it doesn't seem that they really have a plan. We have to understand that the US is a bigger donor of military aid to Ukraine. We're talking here about more than 80 billion euros since the start of the war, and Europe as a whole, they donated 118 billion of euros. So you see how important America is and its support for Ukraine, and European leaders, I think, understand that Europe could not replace what America is providing to Ukraine. So that is something that they are talking about right now. They heard from the Ukrainian president, who urged the Europeans to continue supporting Ukraine, who also vented his frustration over being apparently pressed into talks with Putin, saying that, there is no chance that Ukraine would be willing to make any concessions, and criticizing some leaders for expecting exactly that. And I think what he had to say today gives you a bit of a better understanding what is probably going on here behind closed doors.
Alexandra van Namen, they're reporting from Budapest. Thank you, Alexandra.